Hager and Anil, we love your leadership. Thank you for giving this opportunity, and we hope anybody watching, if you sell into the USDA, if you work with the USDA, this is a government field, but outside the Beltway perspective. So where mission meets requirement and regulation, you're going to learn a lot from Kohlie. He is a certified hydroponicist. I hope I said that right. He does have an oil and gas background. He is an attorney. He is a farmer. He does get his hands dirty, pun intended. And he is from, I guess, the South, right? That says Lafayette, not Lafayette, right, Kohlie?
That's right. Lafayette, not Lafayette.
Good man. Good man. So again, context, food and agriculture. It's one of our nation's most critical infrastructure sectors, folks. We know that the IoT, the Industrial Internet of Things as well, are underpinning these sectors. The infrastructure law, the recently, made law in Inflation Reduction Act. We'll talk about that. All you need to do is Google some of those terms and look up food agriculture. You're going to see words like food security, food independence, food safety. Make no mistake about it. We all know we don't have food and clean water. We don't live very long. This is a critical sector, and Kohlie's here going to shed some light on a lot of the innovation, a lot of what he's doing in Lafayette, which is an incredible story, Lafayette. And also, I believe he will be sharing about how some of this cool tech is creating efficiencies for our farmers and ranchers and those in the parts of the country that are unserved and underserved. So with that, Kohlie, talk to us about who you are a little bit for this audience that we didn't mention, and a little bit about your passion for this topic.
Great. Thank you, Pete. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Y'all can hear me right?
Yep.
Good. So my name's Kohlie Frantzen, and I am speaking to you today from Lafayette, Louisiana. Before this call started, we were kind of joking. We're in a French state of Louisiana, and we're the only state that can't pronounce Lafayette French. And a lot of that's from the Texas oil field impact from all of these folks like my dad, who did everything they could to get off of farms to things like the oil business. So a lot of that impact is here. I grew up in the oil patch. In 1987, when I graduated from high school, the oil business was so bad. We had bumper stickers that said, "Last one out of Lafayette, turn out the lights." It was a pretty distressing time because this community was beholden to the peaks and valleys of an energy industry that was marked by peaks and valleys. That said, it was not in an industry that matched my risk profile. I appreciated the optimism and all of that, but what kept my dad young is what caused me to lose my hair. So that said, went to LSU, studied finance, and thereafter did a number of different industries related to venture capital and things like that we worked with. Fast forward to the 90s, late 90s, and ended up married and in New Orleans, and there ended up in law school. So I fell into a career in DOL first. So I was a GS for a couple of years out of law school. Thereafter, my goal was to end up in the U.S. Attorney's Office. That was sort of my plan. And to do that, I ended up as a prosecutor in Jefferson Parish. They start you off there in juvenile, which the joke is, if that doesn't scare you out of the DA's office, nothing will. The stuff that you see in juvenile in an economically distressed place is remarkable. And in many ways encouraging, because the skills and the talents that are in these communities are phenomenal. We just don't give them the right options. So that said, Katrina hit in 2005, and we found ourselves what we thought would be a 3-day evacuation turned into now 17 years. So critical infrastructure systems and how those can rapidly become unstable, if not terminated, have been a factor in our life for 17 years. And so that experience ultimately led me out of what was a fairly foreseeable path into an unexpected career of agriculture. So that's my general background, and don't want to bore you with the details beyond that, but that's how I arrived in agriculture unexpectedly. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, Kohlie, thank you. And folks, look, I sent a link out to everyone inside the Beltway here who, Secretary Vilsack in June of this year talked about a framework for food and agriculture. We mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. You can Google and see where how much money, just to throw some out there. I think it's Kohlie, $20 billion over 10 years. The Conservation Stewardship Program, $1.8 billion budget covering crops and soils and erosion and storms. And man, this is the stuff that technology that Kohlie will mention today, from satellites to sensors to growing where he is today in a environment where he's creating efficiencies for farmers. That's what we're trying to convey inside the Beltway when we talk about, you know, why certain technologies can enable the mission. So Kohlie, with that, can you kind of high level describe maybe, you know, what you view as, we titled this food, you know, independence, a matter of national security. Why is it that? Why
No
is
question.
it viewed that way?
No question. And to share that with you, you know, we talk about energy independence, right? That has been a buzzword for a long time. My dad, before he died, always said the United States has the best ability to create more hydrocarbons than anywhere on the planet. And we need to become energy positive. We need to create more than we use, and we can export. And he was somewhat prescient. You know, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, south of there, we now have LNG facilities that run in reverse. We thought we were building these things to import natural gas. Rather, we became an exporter. In much the same way, we now sit on the eve of what we can also do in agriculture, to become a producer of agriculture sustainably in a way that we can create enough product that is more than we need. And it sounds ambitious, but it's really not wildly ambitious. We today are the beneficiary of policies that go back to FDR. And I don't mean that in a government policy, I mean that in business policy. A lot of the ways that we have historically aggregated value under one big roof to maximize efficiencies end up today as factory farms, you know, large concentrations of production in California, which is always under a drought and fires, or Mexico, or third parties that may not always have our interests at hand. So we have become reliant on models that involve large concentration of value to maximize efficiencies. And over time, as we now face some climate instability, that model is not necessarily the most healthy for us to remain secure. And, you know, I guess anecdotally, the best thing I can share with you is, I told Pete, you know, before the call, that one of the things that sums it up was in 1776, when George Washington was staring down the baddest naval fleet in the world, outnumbered 30,000 to just a couple of thousand. He had sedition issues. People were quitting. It's December. It's cold. He wrote a letter to his foreman back at Valley Forge. It wasn't a goodbye, I'm out. It was, when I get back, we're going to tear out all of the British crops and we're going to replace them with American crops. It's going to be sycamores. It's going to be pines. It was a courage and a confidence that comes from a grower. All of our founding fathers, if you look at them, had the fierce independence and could be that way because they knew they could grow their own. They had the natural resources and they knew how to manage those resources in such a fashion that they didn't need to be dictated to. And that sense of courage that comes from the knowledge of being able to grow your own goes a long way. You fast forward to 2016, when I was at the White House for a conference, Secretary Vilsack spoke at that time. And he specifically observed that for the last 100 years, to this model of concentrated production and logistics, that has been a very lucky bet. Our question today is, how do we make that a safe bet? And so that's where, when we talk about food independence, to bring that full circle, what we're talking about now is, how do we address our current agricultural system to bring us back where we're in control of our agricultural destiny, that can engage our workforce, that can engage our students today, that will have career pathways in the future, that can emerge into a climate where they can enter agriculture in a way that mitigates worms, weather, weeds, bugs, and have tremendous efficiencies in land conservation. And that's ultimately what we talk about with food independence, is how do we arrive at that point where we as a country can produce our own food sustainably in a way that will protect the next generations to come.
So Kohlie, and for the audience, thank you, Kohlie, for that. You know, I love the stories, and I think we all can get pretty impassioned ourselves about, you know, our country. We know in the news the reason for the passing of the infrastructure law. It's about the planes, the planes, trains, roads, the air, the water, the things that matter. And, you know, pivoting into the technology side of this, AI, IoT, digital twins, robots, drones. Imagine, folks, these things flying over crops, trying to figure out the best means for smart farming, ag tech, as we'll get into here with hydroponics. The food and agriculture sector, factoid, is almost entirely under private ownership and is composed of, this is coming out of the DHS website, 2.1 million farms, 935,000 restaurants, more than 200,000 registered food manufacturing, processing, and storage facilities. That is critical infrastructure. Technology enabling it, right, Kohlie, through things that I hope you can hit on here with your satellite internet access and your water filtration system and your power stations where you are right now. Can you speak to that in the context of hydroponic farming, just in case people don't know what it is?
Absolutely. So I fell into all of this. As we mentioned earlier, I was an attorney, did not foresee myself here. Some folks reached out to me and they wanted to validate a training method back in around 2013 that would allow transitioning service personnel out of the military to pivot into jobs in agriculture. And when these folks reached out to me, you know, they wanted to do greenhouse growing. And I was like, listen, you don't just trade a machine gun for a tractor and you're a farmer. It's a little more complicated. You guys are investment bankers. You're not going to get dirty. You know, my wife's from Crowley, Louisiana, which is a rice capital of our state. You know, ag's a little more difficult. And the answer was, no, we're talking about hydroponics. It's a way that you're doing controlled environment growing. You're out of the soil. You can use 90% less land, 90% less water. You don't need agricultural land. So I was intrigued enough that I went to go to a 6-week training program in Southern California where I became a quote unquote certified hydroponicist. I really don't know what that means, but I have a certificate and it looks very convincing. And I say that in joke, but also in part because it's also the nature of how education worked at the time. Folks would pivot out of the military. They would get 6 to 9 months before they would get out. They could go to be trained in ag. And this was one of these programs that was supposed to set them up. And when I arrived there, I had no idea of the instability of our food system. I thought I was just going to go there, show how something won't work, come back, report it, and move on. And what blew me away was, to Pete's point, and all of those numbers Pete just rolled out, farm production is actually not that high. You know, before World War II, about half of our country grew up on or around farms. Today, you're only looking at a few percent of our population that's actually in food production. While that may be a big industry that involves lots of pieces and parts, the actual production is very low. And what I saw out there was a tremendous skill set in the best labor force in the history in our military that was coming back looking to go to work. What was shocking to me was how beholden we were to California and these aquifers that are under pressure, environmental conditions that are bad. And that has been our model. And we rely on trucking, we rely on all these things that were shocking to me, that, you know, here in Louisiana, we're an agricultural state, but all of our agriculture really doesn't come from here. It comes from Mexico and China and California. So that was a piece of it. And when I went to this training program, it was all theory. And for all these folks that are looking to have a job, theory doesn't pay the rent. And if any of these folks that are trained and get the confidence to think they're going to grow, they're going to go to the USDA, FSA. They're going to get a loan thinking that they're ready to go be a farmer. And then they're going to fail because what they have learned in theory does not translate well to execution in real world. What I loved about where I was I did validate that hydroponics was an incredible system that mitigates the worms, the weather, the weeds, the bugs. It's a method that allows us to remain very local so we can mitigate our trucking needs. We don't need to use all of our land, as was told to me. So with hydroponics, ultimately, and many of you probably know now, it's become much more common, but at the time it was new. Today, it's become an acceptable path in our agricultural future because of the efficiencies. You know, we're not just seeding 2 or 3 times a year and waiting for harvest season. We're here harvesting every week. We're seeding every week, 52 harvests a year or more. And so those efficiencies to me drive the discussion of how we can talk about food independence. Because when you start talking about year-round production, mitigating the weather threats and the bugs and whatnot, with an ability to rapidly educate and deploy, then you have the means and the ingredients to deliver critical infrastructure where and how it's needed the most. And with that, I will say that where I'm speaking to you from today, and unfortunately I can't go outside and walk around, we don't have the time for that. But as Pete referenced, when we went into this, part of my takeaway with this whole effort was what is needed in this industry is a standardization that can allow people to be trained to a standard rather than theory. That way, whenever they go and do their FSA loan application, what they're applying for and the risk that the lender is going to take is on somebody that's been trained to use the very equipment that they're going to get the loan to pay for. And that said, when we started doing that, the oil industry is uniquely situated to creating equipment that's designed to go to one location, be torn down, go to the next, be torn down, go to the next. And that was something that was missing in ag when I went through these programs. And to me, it was an interesting opportunity to marry technology from an industry that's notoriously in difficult climates like deserts and high seas, and apply that to ag, which is likewise notoriously subject to the climate, and come up with a way then that you have something that's trainable and create the outcomes and impacts we're talking about that can make those impacts in rural and urban communities alike anywhere you want to go with them.
Hey, Kohlie. And first of all, thank you, Amanda. And please, folks, put questions in. Kohlie can even answer some of these afterwards. I'm going to jump to Amanda's in 1 minute. I just want to riff off what Kohlie did there for our technology community here. We're not going to get into AI and zero trust and cyber and all that. That's going to have to be part of anything. But he hit on this equity component, and Secretary Vilsack emphasized in his June message about the food system transformation framework to be one that's more resilient to food supply chains. The food system of the future needs to be more distributed and local, right? That means expanding the architecture, putting in place sensors where they need to be. Think of the EV charging station issue we have. We have lots of Teslas and cars. They're not necessarily near the charging stations. Making nutritious food more accessible, emphasizing equity. Executive Order 14017. Again, Executive Order 14017. If you sell into the government, take a read of that one. And that talks a lot about what Kohlie is highlighting. And just to close out the hydroponic component, weather's not an issue as the pod that he's in can protect the plantings from the elements. Plants grow faster. They receive nutrients 24/7 with recirculated water. Vegetables grow 25% faster. And yes, satellite internet access and communication hubs are part of it. So if those techies on this call might be feeling good about, guys like Kohlie who were part of the mission, tech is a big part of what underpins it. Tell me I'm wrong, Kohlie.
You are not wrong.
All right,
and I would say to that real quick, we only have 30 minutes here, but AI and sensors are absolutely at the heart of what we do, and will be. What I can't convey to you with the inability to walk around is to show you that we're at a school. We're currently involved in projects that are very exciting to me that involve college research programs and grants that are underway right now through NSF and others that relate to things like automation and how we can take seedlings that's grown in here, go outside or behind a combine, and using AI and robotics can distribute that into the soil, where then you have robotics and whatnot that are hunting down the weeds, the worms, and the bugs. So there is a side of this that we can get into that speaks to all of that, and it's very exciting. Other things they're doing here that can use AI and sensors that can actually graft pork protein cells onto leafy greens to grow products. So if we're going to go to Mars, you can't send a cow to Mars, but you can send protein via what's grown in crops. It's very interesting, and it relates to all the high-tech stuff, but that's probably beyond the scope of today. But if anybody has any questions, please offline me anytime.
So Kohlie, we go to 9. We're going to 10:15. So those who can stay on, please do. If not, hopefully you got a taste. But we're going to go for another 20 minutes here. I have a call. I have a question coming in from Amanda, Kohlie. If you want to see it, it's how do you train folks across systems that are not always consistently applied, state to state, program to program, region to region?
It's a really good question. What we have done here is we also set up a location over in Berryville, Virginia, which is near DC. And we did that to prove up different climates, different locations. And in our case, really what we focus on here is not necessarily to train people to become, growers in the sense of agricultural specialists. We train folks to run essentially a standard operating procedure that can give them the ability to run wherever they are. A lot of what we found with the military folks is that a lot of them are they're transitory. They don't stay in one location long. So to the extent that we can replicate environments around the country, the thought is if they go to different places, they'll always have a career pathway and something where they know what they're doing. So our goal here is twofold with what we teach. First and foremost is to grow a reliable product regardless of your climate. So we've grown over the years through hurricanes, droughts, blizzards. It's shocking to think that Louisiana and Lafayette in particular has snowstorms, but every now and then we've had this. Same thing in Berryville. So what we did here was, the program I went to was a 6-week program. We trained 2 veterans, Patriot missile operators in 3 days, not 6 weeks, not to become agricultural experts, but how to operate what's behind me. And we rebuilt the exact same environment in Berryville. And with the benefit of what they did, they were able to grow the exact same product we've grown here reliably through much different conditions. Ultimately, to the extent there are different profiles of bugs, for instance, you do have your ag extension agents that are around that are there as resources that can help speak to unique challenges to any specific location. But the overall goal with what we do is to teach folks how to expedite production that's reliable and consistent year round. And the other side of it, I would tell you, is we encourage and demand food safety. That's a piece of the puzzle that a lot of our farm to school stuff doesn't quite get to with raised beds. You can't teach food safety, but when you're in a controlled environment like this, it becomes part of the entire experience. So to the point of food security, to the extent that we can protect against threats like pathogens and particulates, then that's a piece of our security puzzle.
Well, Kohlie, Amanda asked another great question, and it's in the chat. Feel free to, get back to Amanda on this because I think that's a whole hour discussion alone. And folks, if you haven't seen it, it really speaks to this in every sector, how government, industry, and academia, you hear me always talk about this. I had the luxury of at the DOE, as you know, Kohlie, I got to travel to the labs and see how R&D funded by our tax dollars through the government and out to industry ultimately gets commercialized. And that's where industry component and the great work that our industry partners do to create product. But the government role is, really to be that intermediary from regulatory to what happens on the Hill to what happens whoever's in the presidential seat. But every agency, federal agency, in this case, USDA, which is the sector specific agency for the food and agriculture critical infrastructure sector, their job is to help socialize and bring these communities together, to convene them. And I know that's hard more than anybody, but it's something we have to do each and every day. Any thoughts on that, Kohlie? It's partnership.
And sure. And I absolutely think, I think as we sit here today, we've got an incredible workforce that's, whether it's American Indians, whether it's veterans, whether it's the kids in schools all over the country. We've got an interesting demographic at the moment where males aren't going to college like they were. So predominantly the profile of people that are going to college now is 60% female. I was getting this data last week from a friend of mine that's now in academia following a career in USDA. And these are the issues now that are at hand as we also face an encroachment of agricultural land and a lot of the areas that are now expanding for subdivisions and businesses, they're encroaching agricultural land. And same thing here in Louisiana, they're building out solar farms that are, taking up thousands of acres of sugarcane production, and communities are worried about, well, gee, how do we give up this value in ag production and trade that off for only 1 or 2 jobs? And part of what we're looking at now is, I think, going forward, the partnership, if you will, among government that can reach its objectives of conservation, in land use and water use involves more efficient technology that's, it meets students today, technology where they are. Students today have grown up with iPhones. So if we want to meet students with ag on their terms, it's got to be at least as sexy as Snapchat, because that's what my kids and every other kid are off doing, or TikTok. And so we have an ability now to meet them on their terms, where there's something always going. The efficiencies are there. We can protect against all of these threats that scare people out of ag. And we can marry off the need that we have for our food to local production and local skill sets and career pathways that I think now are supported and becoming and getting more traction with these efforts out of USDA and the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think going forward, the partnerships are, the groundwork's being laid, as Bill Sack asked in 2016. And I think now it's why I'm happy he's back, because, he's working on answering his own question, which is how do we take it from a lucky bet and turn it into a safe bet, which is going to require those partnerships in ways that we can be more prudent in how we use our land and water. And we have the ability now to do that. And I think it's going to come through standardized equipment, standardized efforts that can have repeatable results, rapidly trained and rapidly deployed.
Great. Kohlie, question here from John. Is there any movement into the aquaponics at all? Partnerships with fisheries like NOAA, USDA?
Sure, there have been, and I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to that. One of the things you get into with any kind of ponics is everybody starts wanting to do different things. There's aeroponics, hydroponics. In our case, with hydroponics, I really, that's complicated enough. You've got plenty to dig your teeth into with that. When you're dealing with aquaponics, you do have typically invasive species like tilapia. Here in Louisiana, you have to register that fish, because if it gets out into our ecosystem, it can take off. So it's something that we've stayed away from, because it's hard enough to harmonize and get one system going in hydroponics. But once you have to have two ecosystems, where now you got to keep the fish happy and the plants, you tend to have to synchronize difficult things all at once. And, so we have stayed out of that, but I do know there have been efforts and there remain efforts, because it's a really viable thing to do if it can be done right. In our case, it's something that we have chosen not to pursue, but it's certainly, any of these more efficient techniques that can speak to better ways to improve efficiencies. Aquaponics is one of those. There are efforts out there. We just have not kept that on our radar, because it's not something that we've decided to pursue. If we did, we'd do it with crawfish, because we're Louisiana, and we'd have chemical-free crawfish growing in our hydroponic reservoirs. And we thought about that. That may yet be on the roadmap, but not today.
Great answer. And thank you for, the educational component. We got it. It's 10:03. We're going to finish with a parting shot, folks, in about 7 minutes. One last thought, though, Kohlie, I read a comment in one of your articles about encouraging a new generation of farmers. And at the time, I think it was 2019, you pointed out the average age of farmers in the United States was 60 and rising.
That's right.
This government, our government, this country, this beltway, we always talk about next generation reskilling, retraining, recruiting. Can you speak to that and paint a picture of that culture of farming and farmers that, we have to be concerned about, right? I mean, we need to bring up this next generation who are technology savvy, but also love getting their hands dirty, pun intended.
No question. And it's a great question. It's part of what drew me into this. If you'll recall, when we started this whole thing, I believe, I don't know if everybody was on the call, but I talked about the fact that, our family, like many, my dad grew up on a farm and did everything he could to get off of it. Many farmers wanted to work hard so their kids could go to med school. They never wanted their kids to come back to the farm. It's too hard. And, even when my mom grew up, when she wanted dinner at night and she wanted chicken, she'd go outside and get the chicken and wring its neck. And that was dinner. It was a different world that they grew up in. And over time, that's come to be what's associated with farming. And, when we talk about that now, it's part of what freaked me out when I went through that training program was I had no idea that our farmers were timing out and we had nobody coming behind them to pick up that slack. In one of the ways that's proposed, we'll have robots, maybe, but those are going to be relying upon sensors that must be calibrated. So if you don't understand the underlying ag principles, then you don't know what your sensors are supposed to be calibrated to, and they're going to do exactly what they do. So we have to get this next generation of farmers there's nobody behind the farmers here now to pick it up. And so that's where I really got drawn into all of this because what I saw had an application for veterans was easily transferable to kids. And that's where I'm excited to be talking to you from a school, because part of what we wanted to do when we started was make sure that what we do here also impacts these kids that are in middle, upper school, and they can work together and start coming away with an agricultural education and understanding of where their food comes from. And they can understand and perhaps explore, whether it's academic or career pathway, agricultural options that for the last 50 or 60 years have been disfavored by the farmers themselves. They want their kids to become doctors. Well, if you're going to go off to med school, you're going to come out with a lot of debt and be subject to regulation and all that. So these assumptions are all there, but the reality in all of that is it's left us in a position where we're in a lurch. We really do have a need for the tomorrow's workforce to get into ag. We've got systems now that can meet the government and its need to conserve land and water. And we have ways that we can empower that to, I think, address our needs long term to answer that question of who's going to pick up the farming after these guys and girls are gone. And I will tell you, just as an aside, I've been at food safety conferences, and the old guy sitting next to me in his plaid shirt with his cat diesel power baseball cap, as soon as they start talking about new food safety regs, where if a bird poops on a crop and they have to, cordon off 10 square feet, they close their book and they walk out of the room and they say, I'm out. There goes another one. And I have been at those, and it is interesting because you're watching now these folks that have a tremendous amount of education and knowledge, they're just walking out. They're tired. And I think we have an answer, as we said earlier. We can meet the kids, tomorrow's labor force, wherever they are on their terms, and give them something that can give, high yield, high volume production local, to improve access for local communities and improve value long term. So I hope that answers your question. I think that we have now the ingredients to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, I live here with my colleagues on this call generally who are in the area, and we talk a lot about this next generation. And of course we want to train, but I've never been a farmer. I don't even know many farm. Well, but no, a little bit. You're in a place right now. I've been to utilities. I've been to substations. I know this same type of worker. Okay, that is for years. The one or two or three folks that say, I have to keep the power grid up. I have knowledge here, and there's nobody coming behind, and the technology is not going to solve it all. So I think there's that bridge of encouraging people to engage in these industries like farming. Sure. and be able to, whether they're millennial or not, it can be cool. So hey, it's 10:08.
One thing, can I just want to add one more thing real quick to that point. I'm sorry, I know it's 10:08 and we want to wrap up, but the other implication that we didn't discuss is how this impacts other agencies, right? So for instance, when CDC issues a proclamation that we're going to throw away all romaine lettuce because there's a romaine outbreak, that results in a tremendous amount of loss to our water resources, the carbon footprint. Even that alone, if you have folks that have grown up educated in this, they can understand the traceability issues and realize that decision, that boilerplate decision that results in tremendous loss to this country, doesn't necessarily need to be made that way. And so when we talk about this, we're not just talking about growing. We're talking about things that can impact all of the other agencies that have to work together and can work very well together. I think they often just don't get the chance to, but they've got the resources and the ability to do it. So that's another important piece of this, which is when we talk about ag, it's not just growing food. It impacts so many other industries, and we can get to all that on another time when it's not 10:09. But I just want to share that when we talk about tomorrow's farmers, it's not just people inside a greenhouse. It's the people next to you and the agency down the street.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's also for our own community here is we all work with agencies. We work with, I see my colleague Scott up here who worked in DHS. I mean, it's when you're selling into the government or you're just trying to engage, you go to an agency, but there's such a tapestry woven across all. Manufacturing, critical sector, food and agriculture, energy, water, wastewater, transportation. I mean, they're all connected, folks. And Kohlie, and I think this, Scott, to your question, which I think we could spend an hour on, take a look at it, Kohlie, please, if you can get back to Scott. He's really involved in this space, but there is a lot about resilience that is a hot word these days when it comes to energy, but absolutely it's captured in Secretary Vilsack's framework messaging. Take a look at that, Scott. That might give you a perspective as well. So, okay. Hey, look, Kohlie, it's 10:10 and Don and team. Kohlie's going to give us a parting shot, a minute or less, and then I'm going to pass the baton back to Don. I want to thank everybody right now for attending. You're awesome. Come back next month. These are the kind of conversations that we're having with relationships to smart cities, smart whatever, IoT. And Kohlie, parting shot, floor is yours.
Sure. My parting shot, first of all, is, of course, thank you for attending. Hopefully on a Wednesday morning gave you something a little different to think about, and it's been a useful allocation of your time. My parting shot as we sit here today is to Secretary Vilsack's question, how do we make agriculture a safe bet? I think tremendous resources are being allocated now. The one thing that keeps me awake at night, just like Vilsack said years ago, what kept him awake at night, my litmus test and what keeps me awake is how can all these efforts, whether it's allocating $30 million to farm to school programs to buy local produce, can really implement a sustainable future for these small farmers, which have become a focus, rightfully so, to have a sustainable lifestyle, not one that's going to last until the 30 million runs out, but really how something can get them to price point competitiveness. And that's in my mind, the holy grail. All of these efforts that we're rolling out, if you can support that small scale farmer to survive longer than the short-term fix of these very necessary and critical policies, then you have a real home run. And hopefully time will reveal exactly how that question will be answered. Because if you can do that, then ultimately now you've got a way to make us food independent and secure for generations to come.
Well said, Kohlie. Don, back to you.
Once again, I really appreciate Kohlie. You knocked it out of the park. A lot of information, a lot of good ideas, things that cause us to go away and think, as you said. Really appreciate you taking the time. Pete, wonderful job moderating, putting the whole program together. Really appreciate you, brother. And we're going to do this again. October 6th is our next meeting. November 3rd after that. So feel free to become a regular. We'd love to have you participate. We are doing some things with ACT-IAC on the paper side, developing a primer and some other activities as well. So once again, thanks all for coming. Look forward to seeing you next month. This recording will be posted, so share it with your friends, people that weren't able to come to this today, and they'll be able to benefit from the presentation. Thanks all.
Thank you.